And yeah, my day was a little slowed because of that. So if I haven't already done introductions, I've got my colleague Kurt from Kensington here, and we have our friend Doug Page, who agreed to join us because our other colleague Harmony is under the weather. We wish her a speedy recovery. So just to be safe, Doug joined us as well. So we're going to start off with Mannochmore. This is from the Single Malts of Scotland portfolio, and it's from their reserve casks. And I don't know if we're sold out of this, but if we're not, we're bloody close. We've had this for about 4 or 5 months now. It's a gorgeous whiskey for the price. Very floral, very fruity. This is the beast in question here. Matured in hogsheads, which is always very mysterious and sort of not specific. Hogsheads. A hogshead is a very, I don't know. It's like saying it was matured in oak almost. It doesn't tell you a lot. But regardless, 48%. This was exclusive to KWM. We're nearly out of it. And there was a lot. Like we had 120 or 150 bottles of this. So they're gone. Gents, what do we think about this one on the nose?
I think I missed this one first time around. I know we had it open a while back, and I hadn't spent any time with it. Very impressed, actually. It's a little bit bigger, a little bit spicier, and a little bit more savory than I expected, to be honest.
The nose is winier than I was expecting. Like almost getting like wine gums and fruit leather, like fruit by the foot.
Yeah, that.
Yeah, almost some like old dried out Christmas cake, if that makes sense, where there's not quite that richness there, but there's definitely some of that fruit and spice and bready note in there.
They didn't use enough brandy or rum or whiskey.
Mango high chews. I like that.
Ooh. Yeah, I mean, I could almost see this straying a little bit into like Hubba Bubba, but like not like fresh out of the pack. Maybe you've been chewing it for a few minutes.
Yeah. No, there's some lovely complexity to it, I think, given its age.
Oh, the palate is just, it's like fluffy, it's soft, it's pillowy, really floral.
Quite kind of agreeing with Max's note there too regarding the citrus. I don't find it really lemony, limey, whatever, but it's got those strong acids that to me are quite citric.
Mm-hmm.
It's a cool nose. It's a lot more cask than spirit driven, I'd say though.
Well, I would say it's to me, it's actually kind of a nice balance of the two, because with some of these like hogshead matured whiskeys where you're just getting, a bit of that oak influence, and they can sometimes be very spirity, and that works sometimes, but a lot of times it just means that whatever you've got is kind of bland and boring. I think you've got enough of the oak here, but not so much that you're starting to hide that spirit character, because I think those floral tones are really the hallmark of Mannochmore. It's a very light, fruity, floral spirit, and one we don't see that much of, on reflection. It's a distillery that, for whatever reason, Diageo doesn't seem to trade with other blenders as much, because otherwise we'd see more of it from the independent bottlers.
I haven't even announced this to my own gang, but I'm starting to put the machinations in motion for a Mannochmore tasting for the club. Mm-hmm. Fascinating distillery, fascinating distillate. So I can't wait to jump into that.
Are you going to
Diageo special release one that it was? I think it was in a black box, right, Andrew?
The 23.
Yeah, I wanted to be so mad at that for the price and everything, but it was like that Craiganmore at the same time. It was like, they're damn good. I hate the price point, but they're damn good. But I really wanted to bottle that Mannochmore. Maybe it's got like a speed trade.
I think there was actually an earlier Mannochmore in the 20s too.
I think so.
I feel like you need to throw a Glenlawsie in there just for contrast, considering that Mannochmore is pretty much surrounded by it.
Mm.
And both of them kind of have a fruity note to it, but there is definitely a difference between the two distillates, I feel like.
So Mannochmore is Glenlassie's Papal State or something like that?
Something like that. I'm sure there's many analogies that could be used.
Definitely a bigger Mannochmore fan than Glenlawsie fan in general.
Mm-hmm. Well, we threw this into the lineup right at the start because I wanted to kick things off with something really light, refreshing, floral, fruity, because the next whiskey we're going to roll into is the oldest whiskey in the entire lineup tonight. And part of the rationale here was, it's an older whiskey, but in my opinion, really delicately matured. And I didn't think that this would show as well if it had been later in the lineup. And, this is one of those things that I've always wrestled with over the years with tastings, especially back in the early days. Do you save the marquee bottle or the most expensive bottle for the end of the lineup, or do you slot it in where it's going to show its best? And just knowing this whiskey, having had the privilege to try it many times before, it seemed to me we wanted to get this thing in before even the Rosebank, which has got that sherry and I think Madeira sort of influence in it. This is, again, refill, but quite delicate. What have we got here? 44 years of age, 42.4%. So the Angels were not kind to this. We're assuming it's from a sherry bud, and that's only because of the outturn on it. But the fact of the matter, and partly from profile, but the fact of the matter is we don't know. They never specified. They're a little like that with some of these director's specials. I don't know why they don't tell you the cask type, because I'm not really sure what there is to hide from there. But sometimes they just don't tell us. Thoughts on the nose?
I could nose this all night long. There's just such a beautiful depth and complexity to it.
Mm-hmm. It's got that kind of old school dumpy sherry note coming across.
Well, and it's so wonderful when you get stuff of this age. I mean, you always worry that those first notes are going to be very woody or tannic or something else like that. But this just feels like a lovely balance, that they bottled it as much because the ABV was dropping as opposed to it becoming too oaked or overaged.
Kurt?
It's the kind of whiskey that's not really fair to other whiskeys, right?
Yeah.
It's next level kind of stuff. I don't know. Pretty, like the spices are so gentle, and that's that really, really tired wood, like you said. It's like creamy and dulce de leche. I get like orange fruits and everything going on. It's weirdly lightly tropical, but not really into the tangy tropicals, at least on the nose. Like really, really delicate white fruits and stuff for me.
This is a whiskey that really flirts with the tropical fruits, but never fully lets you have it all. And the best comparison is possibly from the same parcel. I don't know, but that Port Ascog 45, which has kind of came out as a contemporary to this, that goes way more into the tropical and those Christmassy sherry sort of tones than this does. But this is different. It's got its own personality. It's got some nice notes of aged Calvados in there, milk chocolate.
Good call.
The Calvados, and actually that Calvados one, that's the first, and I've nosed this whiskey a number of times. I've rewritten my tasting note for this whiskey 3 times because we've opened bottles, and sometimes you get different nuances from it. But yeah, I'm really getting an interesting little apple fruity Calvados hit off of it.
Do you know what it makes me think of on the nose? It reminds me of really good, pardon me, Amrit, if it was allowed to sleep for 40 years. It's got those same sort of spice profiles and really, really soft fruits as Amrit does.
Would it have to find somewhere cool and damp to do that?
It'd have to do something.
Presumably not Bangalore.
Yeah. It's a pretty nose, man. Very nice.
All right, what about the palate?
Yeah, it's so interesting where I really want to leave some of this for the end of the night, even though it's soft and delicate, where you get that initial sort of wave of cream and a little bit of that spice and almost like a reduced plum jam for me or something else like that.
Nice.
And the lower ABV just kind of trails off a little bit, but it doesn't end quickly. It just kind of tails off for a really long time. It's kind of like if Kurt were to play a strum of his guitar and then just let it just like linger there for 5 minutes. Where it just kind of, there's always something there. And there's just such a lovely mouth-watering note to it that I really, really enjoy.
Doug, it's kind of like when you're trying to leave a loud club or maybe a concert, and when you don't think anyone's watching, you step back like a foot, and then you slowly step back another foot, and then just at some point they realize you're gone, but you haven't noticed them leave. So
the old Ferguson smoke bomb, I'm assuming it was called back in the day.
Well, no, I would do the full-on Batman. I would just wait for the opportune moment and bang, I was out of there. That was my technique. No one likes goodbyes, so yeah.
The tights were kind of weird, can't lie, but you pulled it off somehow.
Kurt, thoughts on the palate?
Yeah, not as tannic as I would have thought, to be honest, thinking it's sherry with this much age. But I think the tannins do say that it is sherry, just tired wood kind of. Firmer oak, those hallmarks of old whiskey. It's like really hard to explain what those notes are that come together to be like old woods and polishes and things that we don't actually taste, but that's where it kind of goes. Fruits are a little restrained, but beautifully so. You just kind of want to hunt for them and chew on it. I love this style of whiskey.
It's one of those whiskeys that you'd want to have in like your brandy snifter in enough of a quantity that you could just kind of sit there and check in on it every once in a while to see what's happening. But yeah, for me, like wine gums, milk chocolate, it is quite woody and there's some big spicy tones in there, but this one didn't go over the hill, but it was getting very close to not legally being whiskey, which would have been a shame.
Well, it's amazing even just to think about what kind of wood is aged in this, right? Like we talk about a lot of these sort of modern seasoned sherry casks that we get, where there's a lot of that sort of influence, where there's just, given the age, still very delicate for it. And when you think that this is probably a second or third refill sherry butt, I mean, the wood was probably harvested, potentially right around the Second World War, which is really neat because it's just a different style of wood than what you would often get these days. So really, really neat to think back.
Well, and kind of on that note, just one other thing to reflect on is the price. Like, there's not a lot of 44-year-old single malts or like 40-year-old, let alone that you can find at that price point. And it's because this was a product that was bottled 2-3 years ago. They haven't raised their price. We were lucky to get more bottles. I think this is the second or the third time we've been lucky enough to get a top up of bottles, and yeah, it definitely does not disappoint. LPs of more sustained. Okay, we're going into guitar talk. I don't know what you guys are talking about. I'll just trust that you're correct. On that note, Rosebank. Let's talk Rosebank. Rosebank, the Roses. This is the Unity bottling, which came in not too long ago. This is a parcel of Rosebank that was matured in a mix of bourbon and Madeira casks and then put into glass. And they've been dribbling this out over the years. This is, I believe, the 6th of 7 releases. There's one final one that we have in store. I think that's the final one. Bernadette's on there. She can maybe confirm, but I'm pretty sure it's the final. So this is the second from final release we'll ever see from Elixir Distillers of Rosebank whiskey. And I'm not saying this to get you to like lose your shit and go onto the website and buy it right away. But the crazy thing with these whiskeys is that they sell out immediately in Europe and immediately hit the secondary market because there's just not a lot of people releasing Rosebank. I mean, Rosebank's releasing Rosebank, but you don't see it from other independent bottlers anymore.
I think it's very much that buyback situation where they've had to buy back a lot of old casks at obviously a premium from what they would have been, producing for. So the prices on anything that they're letting out now is crazy.
Yeah, well, you think back to sort of, what Rosebank was versus now that it's just in the process of getting reopened. Now Ian McLeod, who's purchased sort of the rights, and a lot of the old stock are probably sitting on the majority of barrels out there. And so, this is not inexpensive, but it's at first blush an amazingly beautiful whiskey, and comparatively to some of the sort of future releases that we're going to see at a similar, or much older age, it's actually pretty reasonable value, all things considered, and certainly a beautiful dram.
Mm-hmm.
I think too, you're looking at vintage too. So this would have been at the very latest 93, because that's when they shut down, right? So you're not just looking at a 21-year-old, I think. You're also looking for a period of distillation when things were made a lot differently than they are now too. Rosebank was always one of those ones that, you guys know me, I'm sort of over sentimental with the close distilleries, but it was one that I never really caught into as much as some other people did. I kind of was maybe a little bit more into Little Mill, a little bit more into Imperial, and then Parcel and Brora and stuff, of course. Rosebank, though, has grown on me and grown on me and grown on me. We were over to Andrew's place a couple of years back for a gathering, and I remember revisiting the Diageo special release 21-year-old. I can't remember if it was the 2011 or 2014 version. I think it was the 11.
It was 2011.
And it absolutely knocked my socks off. And I had to chase down a bottle of it. So there are some stunning Rosebanks out there. And I think this one is absolutely true to form. What do you think, Ferguson?
Yeah, no, I agree. And I was just going to comment for a moment on where we've come from and where we are now. Like when I first started, I remember getting Rosebanks in the shop that were like 11, 12 years old from Gordon MacPhail. And there were, I think some of them could have been as cheap as $80 a bottle. And it was a closed distillery. And yeah, I mean, you took it for granted. You're just like, oh yeah, they'll keep bottling. Like they just keep coming. Like they get a little bit more expensive every year, but not a lot. And then it was probably about 10 years ago that Rosebank started becoming less and less common. And that tipping point, I think, was when Gordon MacPhail released that 1991, I forget what they were called, but those ones that came in the maroon boxes with the little ribbon button tie on them. And it was about $650 or $700 a bottle. And everyone was like, oh my God, that's a lot for a Rosebank. And you'd think about it, be like, yeah, but it's a closed distillery and nobody else has it. And it's a third or a quarter of the price of a Port Ellen. And I think part of it is people were jonesing for that peated style that both Port Ellen and to a lesser extent Brora had. And maybe because Rosebank didn't have like a bold element to it, it just never got the cachet or the volume of cult following that some of those other distilleries had. And to your point about Little Mill, Kurt, like I've always been more of a fan of Rosebank than Little Mill. Little Mill's the whiskey that I really struggle with. Like I find a lot of times it's got this dry, bitter paraffin note to it that I really can't handle. Probably in the same way that people can't handle the sweet lavender Bowmores.
I kind of hunt for that note, and to me, Little Mill always has this sort of white, flowery, standing by the mill kind of smell to it. Very kind of doughy and ready, slightly behind everything. That was always more my thing, and the really naked Bowmores too. Rosebank took me a while, but now I've kind of put it on a little bit of a pedestal and wish I'd stopped earlier.
Well, back to the nose and palate on this. I almost in a way wish they didn't say that there was a Madeira cask influence in this, because I think in some ways that might scare people off before they've even had a chance to try it. Because I'm not getting a ton of that on the nose. I might be getting maybe some French oak spices, something like that creeping in here, but I'm not getting that typical Madeira note that I would associate with a cask that had, matured whiskey for quite a while in it. The nose, it's floral, it's fruity, it's soft. It's kind of everything that I'd expect a 20-something Rosebank to start out like.
Absolutely love that they let it rest in glass for some time as well. I think that actually not only allows it to marry in a way that a lot of, blenders and other folks are probably pumping out. I know John Glazer at Compass Box always loves talking about, a minimum of 6 months in his mind, stuff needing to marry before he'll release it. But I think this really, really lets it come together in a beautiful way and just rounds it out where, to your point, Andrew, I think I would have troubles pulling out strictly Madeira notes in there. But when you sort of mention it, it's a beautiful assemblage of sorts.
Yeah. Onto the palate. I think the palate matches the nose neatly. It's floral, it's sweet, fruity. There's some nice spice tones in there too. That's that Madeira influence coming through, adding that kind of decadent spice that flows into the finish. It's very pretty. Jeff's comment, the Rosebank is nice, but for the same price, I think the Bunna is nicer. And I mean, I think that's in some ways a statement of where we are with things, like that a 21-year-old Rosebank would be priced even remotely close to, say, a 44-year-old Bunnahabhain, does talk to the fact that, you know, there's not many people that have Rosebank left, and those that have it know it's valuable and know that it's scarce. And, you know, the comment about buying, Ian McLeod buying back casks of Rosebank is an interesting one, because, I mean, that's a story we've seen play out several times before when, you know, distilleries like Glendronach get bought from Chivas, or even Ben Riach. Before that, they would go and try to acquire casks from other people that had them. Glen Glaza did the same thing. Granted, they were starting with a much smaller warehouse than some of those other guys, because you want to corner the market. You don't want other people bottling your whiskey. You want your bottlings to be the ones that everyone's talking about, and they're good. But I mean, Ian McLeod's going to have nothing reasonably priced from Rosebank for probably 8 to 10 years. So it's going to be a while until the spirit that started flowing, or that will start flowing, is going to actually bear some fruit.
No, and it's hard. The chat's starting into a bare knuckle brawl here, I think, in the Bunna versus Rosebank. But I feel like these are just two very different styles, not only in terms of age, but sort of the cask type. So both are beautiful, and I think we can all agree to get along before it gets too bloody in there, folks. So
yeah, well, save them in the glass. We'll come back. We'll see what we think. But I mean, that Rosebank for just 21 years of age, it drinks way above what you'd expect most 21-year-olds. And maybe part of that is that up to a decade, presumably, that it's spent sitting in glass. I don't know how much oxygen exposure. I'm assuming it was in demijohns, but you have to think that there's got to be some sort of faint bottle aging that happens in those.
Well, and it's not only just the oxidization, right? Like the congeners and esters are slowly hydrolyzing, right? So they're slowly breaking down, and you're just rounding out this, where, you know, over 50, 60 years, you're going to get into, you know, a very tired whiskey. But for me, there's that sweet spot after a decade or two. So anyways, I'll stop there before I get too nerdy on that stuff.
Kurt, any final thoughts on the Rosebank before we move on?
Love it. It's my money on the line. I would struggle with that price point. There is a part of me that just has that little bit of still has that little inkling of common sense. It says a 21-year-old shouldn't cost this much, but I do get finite quantity, and I do get the sentimentality of it all, and the quality is absolutely there. So I did hum and haw over getting one of these myself. I did not get one.
It's not too late.
I know, I'm still thinking about it. Anyways, moving on before somebody overhears me say that.
All right, we're on to the Carsebridge next, which was a fairly old grain distillery. Originally started in 1798. Started distilling 1799, although it would have been a malt distillery back then, and then converted to grain. I believe that was in the mid 1800s. It converted to grain. And then, as with many distilleries, when we got to the 1980s, you know, there was too many. They had to get rid of some of them, and sadly, Carsebridge was shut down in 1983. It had a cooperage that remained in operation until 2011, but that shut down eventually too. So this is the first of 4 whiskeys we're going to sample now from the Whisky Trail collection, and this is from their Silhouette range. I'm going to share my screen with you here so you can see what we're talking about. 48 years of age. You know, there was a time, and Kurt, you can probably comment on this too, where we used to see a lot of like 40 to 55-year-old grain whiskeys, and that's kind of dried up. There's not many people releasing those anymore.
One of the first tastings I ever did for the store, maybe not one of the first, but very early on anyways, I did that high-end grain tasting where the average age was, I think, 44 years old for 7 or 8 grain whiskeys. Average sat at 44 years old. That was the one that had that ridiculous XOP, Caledonian in it, and North of Scotland 50, and all that kind of fun stuff. There was a period there where those were readily available, and they were like 200 to 500 a bottle, except for that north of Scotland. But I think we're now looking at a whiskey that's almost 50 years old. It's in an expensive cask type. It's from a vintage that for some reason 73s just tend to be really freaking good most of the time. I think the price is actually about half of what it should be for what's in the glass in this one. It's kind of surprising. I can't say that very often anymore.
And I'll kind of add to that, Kurt, that I mean, in a way, it's kind of surprising that this is actually not sold out yet. Because I think if this was in one of those sovereign bottles, it would have been gone by now. And I think it's because people look at it and they don't see a grain whiskey, because you've got this bottle that's got a cool, funky artwork on it that maybe you don't understand. So you just gloss over it and you keep going. And I think Carsebridge also doesn't have the same name recognition that some of the other grain distilleries have, because we've not seen very much of it. Like, we see a lot more of, North British, Invergordon, Cameron Bridge, other closed distilleries like Cambus we might see too, and maybe those ones are recognizable. But Carsebridge, we've had so few bottlings of that it's probably it's a mystery to people. It's mysterious, so they don't know what it is.
I like that, and it's got to be at least half cask on this one that's taken it this direction. But we kind of moved a little towards malt territory with this. You can tell it's a grain, but it's definitely closer to malt. And there's some real cool, sour, tangy, tropical notes on the palate that I'm really loving, and you don't generally find on too many old grains.
It's very rummy too. Like, it reminds me of like older, especially like Guyanese, Demerara style rums. Doug, thoughts on the nose?
Yeah, no, I completely agree on sort of that old Demerara style sort of rum. I mean, it's a lovely cast. Like, on the nose, there's some of those classic sort of like old polished banisters and shoe wax and sort of almost a little nail polishy sort of note to it. But my goodness, that palate for the age, and considering it's a grain, is pretty lovely, I have to admit.
Well,
wonderful.
I honestly have not often been a fan of grain and sherry, and Kurt's like, I think, I'm assuming, agreeing with me on that. Yep. Because I find that like the best grains are ones that have got maybe a nice clean, like honey, vanilla, American oak addition to the spirit. And then you get this little oxidative thing. And so you get some nice fruit notes developing. But I find that like sherry casks are often with grain, they're so tannic, and the malt doesn't have enough weight to hold up to them. Or the grain rather doesn't have as much weight to hold up to them as, say, maybe a malt whiskey might. So I'll be honest, when I see grains that are sherried and have this much color, I have a bit of trepidation before trying them. But this one, like, the sherry's great. The balance of the cask is great. It's not overwhelming. I mean, it's a grain whiskey. You get maybe a bit of a narrower palate profile to it, but everything that's there is nice.
Those, like, you literally spoke for me. Everything you said, I 100% agree with. All of
that. I hate to agree with the both of you, but I also agree.
So tasty. But I guess this is the last thing that maybe I would say about this before we move on. And of course, we always like to go back through, have our speed round. If you poured this in a blind tasting of rums, I think I'd have a hard time. I'd be like, there's something different about this, but I'd have a hard time thinking that this was not rum, based on the nose and palate. And I think that's also that convergence of some of these older, especially the older grain whiskeys. They end up becoming very similar to some other old spirits where the waters get a bit murky.
Interesting. Jeff says it reminds him of the last SMWS rum that was released, which I believe was a 11-year-old Worthy Park. So leaves it's a bit more on the Jamaican side, but I think there's probably some arguments on a couple of these.
Well, I can see that. I can see little tendrils of that 1941 Long Pond that Gordon MacPhail released. But also, like, and I know, Doug, you had a chance to try that 50-year-old Appleton. Like, I can see elements of those older, as well as those older, like, Demerara rums too. But yeah, it's, older brandies, older whiskey, like especially Armagnac, older Armagnacs, less so with cognac, older Armagnacs, older rums, and older grains kind of seem to merge a little close to me for profile. But anyway, delicious, fun. How many of you have not tried Carsebridge before? Probably a bunch of you, I'm guessing. So see, if I saw a bunch of hands go up there. So just a cool chance to try a distillery that you rarely see. And I guess the last comment I'd have about this just relates to grain whiskey. And this is a little bit uncharitable, but I used to say that grain was the accidentally good whiskey. And the reason I say that is that these were never meant to be drank neat as individual whiskeys. They were meant to be components. They were meant to be building blocks for blends. No one distilled these thinking that someday there'd be people on the internet tasting it together and talking about it. They just assumed it would be bottled and blended into and bottled as a blend. And that was it. And I think it's remarkable that some of these older grains can be so interesting on their own when they were never intended to be consumed that way. That was never their purpose. Their purpose was to be the filler in a blend. And yeah, cool. All right. Ben Nevis, shall we? Or Nevi. This is our only Ben Nevi in tonight's tasting. Let me see if I can find the page here. Here we go. Sadly, this one appears to be out of stock. But let me pull the page up. This is a 2015 Ben Nevis, 6 years of age, bourbon barrel, 58.4%. I was very fortunate to have the chance to sample a sister cask to this that we were considering for KWM. I don't think it's one we're going to bottle, partly because I don't know about you guys, but I'm a little bit over the young Ben Nevis curiosities. I mean, they're interesting, but I'm not sure we want a full cask of it. But what have we got here? We've got something very funky on the nose.
Well, it's so hard. I mean, the 96 vintage of Ben Nevis has become so legendary, and through so much of the 2000s, we almost saw no stock sort of hitting the markets, as so much of it was sucked up to Japan for different sort of Japanese blends. And then now we're starting to see some of the teenage stuff sort of hit the market, and so it's almost an unfair comparison in many regards.
Yeah. Well, and even the 96, I mean, I don't know if you were part of them, but I know Kurt was part of some of them. We've recently had some 1996 Ben Nevis that didn't live up to expectations. So, I mean, it seems like there was a parcel of 96 that was magic and another parcel which was not. But yeah, Ben Nevis is interesting. It's a distillery that's had a bit of a fad in recent years. Like, we saw a ton of 4 and 5 and 6-year-old Ben Nevis hit the market, and some of them were good. Most were interesting, but like none of them said buy a full cask of this, because everyone's going to want it. And yeah, I mean, I like the nose on this. I've not tasted it yet. I'm sure I've written a tasting note for this at some point in time, but curious to know what you guys think. My first instincts on this were crab apples and like Isle of Mull cheddar.
This is I'm with you, Andrew. I've been so underwhelmed with almost anything I've had recently from Ben Nevis. We've seen a lot of really sub 10-year-olds and a few that have just been over that 10 mark. This is one of the good ones, though. I love this nose. I love that you talk about those sour notes and everything. It's crab apple, as you said. It's that kind of, I don't know, there's a weird tang to Ben Nevis. It's hard to put it any other way. It like just It kind of does this weird tingly thing to the mouth. I would have thought sherry at first based on the nose, but it seems a little cleaner, a little bit more vanilla and banana and stuff on the palate to me. Beautiful. I love it. I think it's still too young. I think it's underripe, but I love it. I think this is exactly what it should be. This is good distillate.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, there's almost like a crabapple and quince jelly kind of note to it for me on crackers. Where it's yeah, to your point, Kurt, a little underripe, could probably used a bit more time in there, but it's still actually pretty rich, creamy. There's a sweetness there that sort of balances out that sour sort of note.
Yeah. On the palate, I'm getting similar things like kind of like a mango chutney, or like a crab apple, I don't know, crab apple antipasto. I don't know if that's a thing. Maybe it should be, maybe it shouldn't. But yeah, it's got this fruity, funky profile to it. And I think that's what people love about Ben Nevis. But yeah, I think a lot of us are just hoping to see something a little more mature and a little bit more, because we've been spoiled with some of those like 96 vintages of Ben Nevis. And actually, I think there were some really good 95 and 93s as well. But 96, I know, is the one that everybody gets really excited about.
I think the Ben Nevis character to me is exactly what you said. It's like that kind of mango chutney with all those cool fruit tones, but it's like it's been stirred up with an old Tom Waits leather shoe or something. It's just got some crazy funky character to it. I love the distillate. I think it can be really poorly handled in shitty wood, but I think the distillate itself is one of the most interesting in Scotland.
Yeah. And sadly, it's all gone. But save a little bit. We'll come back to it. We'll see how it evolves in the glass over time. We're actually on to what, curiously, was the day I sampled them, my favorite whiskey in the entire Whisky Trail range of the Silhouettes, the Croftengea. We had a debate earlier. I'm not sure if anyone's a phoneticist. Is that such a thing? Like someone who knows how to properly pronounce words in different
It is now.
dialects? Should be. Doug, what was your version like? I've always thought it was Croftengea. You thought it was...
Oh, it's I've heard very many different versions of it. I just call it peated Loch Lomond now, just out of trying to not embarrass myself too much. I think I was joking before we got on that it could be like, if you really wanted to get weird with it, you could call it like some new medicine coming out, like Croftengea or something like that. You know, go see your doctor to get, you know, help or
like
something.
You'll lose weight, but we can't tell you that in the ad because that would be illegal. And also, you probably will not enjoy life as much before, but that's a whole different matter. Yeah, peated Loch Lomond. I mean, the thing with Loch Lomond is it's such a wacky distillery. There's so much going on there. They have so much potential. Whatever the pronunciation is, I don't think it really matters. But like this is the weird and wacky, sort of in all its glory. And
I feel like we're going to get into a similar debate in the comments on where we were having the Bunna versus Rosebank folks. I feel like this is going to be equally dividing, where there's going to be some people that are going to love this. There's going to be some people who really do not. And I feel like there's not going to be too many people who are going to be neutral on the subject.
That's probably a fair point. I just realized I haven't shared the screen for this, so I'll bring it up. 53.2%, 2006 vintage, 15 years in a hogshead, which, as we know, is a not so useful descriptor because we don't know if it's ex-bourbon or ex-sherry. But nevertheless, it was in a hogshead. Here you go. There's the artwork. I have to say, I love the label design on this. It reminds me of Fraggles, like, you know, the construction guys on Fraggle Rock. There's something about that. Those were my favorite part of the entire Fraggle show. I could have cared less about the actual Fraggles. It was the construction guys that were exciting.
I'm more excited for you to try and sing the opening verse to the TV show, because I feel like it's stuck in your head somewhere.
It probably is, but I would need to be prodded because it's not coming without, you know, some sort of encouragement.
It was Sunday nights with Disney and
Yeah.
can't remember all the shows he used to air. Raccoons.
Uh, anyway, back to the whiskey. Thoughts on the nose on this one?
I'm gonna go slightly ahead of you. I've done the nose and the palate, and I can say I've tried it.
It's so Kurt is not a fan, is what I'm hearing there. Okay.
I mean, the nose is really challenging for me. I feel like I could spend some time with it. And then I get into the palate, and it actually is really quite lovely in a weird sort of like way. It again, for me, it's almost like a Lechake or something like that, where it's very polarizing. Right? Like
That's why I did that earlier. The L. It's so Lechagian to me. I didn't want to say it and bias people, but I'm glad you said that. The palate is
special. You were calling Andrew
no.
I don't love Lecheg. I think that's not that's a well-known position. And I agree, the nose on this is challenging. Like there's like some serious like wet like donkey shit on this. Like it has got a very sort of slightly off-putting nose, but the palate to me is like this. It's like being at a carnival. It's fun. It's lively. There's things happening. It's hard to stay focused because you're getting pulled in all different kinds of directions. And to me, that's what I like about Loch Lomond sometimes, is that it's not straight and narrow. It's like all over the place. It's like that movie, Everything Everywhere All at Once. That's kind of like what the palate is like on this whiskey.
I'm just glad there's a number of people in the comments on Team Lecheg with me, or Ledeg, or however we want to pronounce it. But regardless, it's beautiful, and I don't care what you guys say about it. It's I'll happily take all the bottles that you don't want, including in the last SMWS outturn, which had an absolutely stunning, I think, Lecheg. So
stunning doesn't necessarily denote good or quality. You know, a knock to the head is stunning too.
It was good. It was stunning. It was beautiful. But beauty is in the eye of the beholder, or the eye of the palate, so to speak. So,
and though I've not tasted this, the palate to me is like flaming diapers full of baby shit. It's dumpy, composty, shitty. And I'm not saying that in terms of quality. I'm like literally saying like tasting notes. It's got like all of those kind of. I can't do it.
To me, there's so much going on there that I love. Like, it reminds me of this cake that this girl Rebecca used to make. She had a dessert shop in Inglewood, and I would do these whiskey and chocolate tastings with her. And she made a flourless dark chocolate cake with that was infused with cayenne pepper. And the palate on this just takes me back to that. There's mezcal notes coming off of it. There's faintly tropical fruits coming out as well. Like, this thing is so bananas. That's why I like it. I agree. The nose, if I were to just like nose this without giving it a chance, like I'd like you, Kurt, I'd pass up on it, but I don't know. There's something about the palate here that I just can't. I love it. I can't stop going back to it.
I actually dislike the palate even more than the nose. But to me, and I know Doug was kind of a fan of this one, and I get why. Not this whiskey, but what I'm about to mention. This is kind of a slamming together of Lecheg and that Finglassie. The rest will be thankful Finglassie. Also really dirty and weird, and like, I don't know. But I can get behind that Finglassie a little more than the others. But this to me is
it's so fascinating for me, where it feels like, Loch Lomond, you didn't see much of the light of day outside of sort of during its disco cow or whatever. The equal part of it during those sort of metal tins that were very stylized back in the day. And then all of a sudden through
triple screen printed, Doug. Triple screen printed. It was
screen printed. I stand corrected.
They were a landmark of art, but terrible.
When I was there, they were talking about them. They refer to them as the Disco Cow series, like literally across the board. That's how all the employees refer to them even.
Well, but the amazing thing is it feels like Loch Lomond is one of the last great underrated distilleries in many ways, where we've seen a number of SMWS releases. You guys have that lovely 11-year-old single cask in the shop. Hopefully you've got more coming, because it feels like there's actually some opportunity to bottle some of these things at a reasonable price and really surprise people with, you know, sweetness, with funk. They've got so many different styles. It's really neat. And again, it spurs a conversation as much as anything else in this lineup, which is really neat and fun.
Mm-hmm. So. Well, you know, going back to that, and again, back to the Disco Cow series, which, to be fair, I think was the Glen Scotias, the Loch Lomond.
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
The Loch Lomond's, I think, had like something that looked like an elk, but it was actually supposed to be a deer. And it looked like a terrible vodka bottle from a tourist shop in Banff. Regardless, the 18, as I remember it, was quite good. And there was one of the 12s. I don't know if it was, I think it was Inchmere. I think all of those were Inchmere. Was quite good too. But, you know, the cool thing with Loch Lomond is they can bottle as Loch Lomond a single malt that contains up to a half a dozen different unique components. And so within that single malt concept, they could in theory blend something far more interesting and complex, thanks Kurt, than just about any other distillery. And I can't say whom, but there's a distillery in Canada that I gave some advice to recently that they followed up on that I'm excited about, because they have all these really cool, unusual pieces. And to me, what was most interesting about that was that if they took those, they could make something more interesting than any of those all on their own. And they ran with it, which is cool. So you'll find out about that soon. That's all I can say about that. But I will say, I still think this Croftengea is probably the most interesting, at least of those first three we've had, because it's like, it's wacky and it's fun. And to me, there's no off notes to it. And yeah.
Well, you either say that there's no off notes, or in Kurt's case, you might say there's only off notes. Either way, I feel like we could debate this all night long and have a great night of it. So
it's not just out of tune; it's built on dissonance. it's hard for me, that one. I'm sorry.
All right, let's move on to the Caol Ila, and then we'll go on to the speed round. So this is the last whiskey in the Silhouette collection from Whisky Trail. Let me find the bottle here for you. There's still some stock of this one left. Don't know how much. 2013 cask of Caol Ila, 8 years of age, matured in a hogshead, 60.6%. With most of these, I think just 18 to 24 bottles came to the market. So here is the whiskey. And thoughts on the nose? Oh, man. So beef bouillon.
Is
it even like chicken broth too?
Do we have any? Yeah, chicken broth's actually a really good one. Do we have any deets on the hogshead? Was this a wine cask of some sort? Like it's very un-Caol Ila like for me, where for me personally, Caol Ila has to be in probably my top 3 distilleries in Scotland. It's just so consistent, so available. I always need a bottle of it open on my shelf. And blind, I don't know if I would have been able to pick out that this was actually a Caol Ila.
I think if you dig, you can get it behind it. But I'm with you on that. Blindly, you could tell me it was a lot of distilleries, I think. But if you know it's Caol Ila, look behind the cask, because it's huge cask here again. I think it is Caol Ila. But I like your call about wine casks. It's something. It's a reach bar, or it's like something that's big and loud.
Well, it's got that bacon note. And for me, Caol Ila's either got bacon or scallops on it. And this one has the bacon note. It's that like salty, overly thick, you know, somehow dried out British bacon. Nowhere near fatty enough.
Yeah, it's kind of like this dry, almost flinty, I almost on the note of sulfur, but not sulfur from the cask, but like an off yeast sulfur note, if that makes sense.
You have like an ozoniness to it. Yeah, peanut butter. My original tasting note, I think, talked about biscotti and peanut brittle, which to me, like whenever you get that peanut note, I got peanut butter and peanut brittle. To me, I'm instinctively thinking this has got to be an ex-Jim Beam cask of some kind. What about the palate? Oh man, that's so Laphroaig. It's way more Laphroaig than Caol Ila on the palate. It's that dirty mop bucket with Dettol in it.
Yeah, and kind of like used gauze bandages and some leftover polysporin that's dried out over time.
I love the Dettol note. Absolutely behind that.
Oh.
So I really quite like the nose. It takes a little bit to dig into it because at first I was kind of shy with it. I quite like the nose. The palate, though, I think we're in an age that is going to be looked back on unfavorably to young peated whiskies and to peated whiskies in general as they're allowed to go from here. I think this was an age, and I know Lumsden did it with Ardbeg and stuff, where a lot of distilleries went a little deeper into phenols or into the faints, sorry. And I think
trying to just stretch out the spirit run to
stretch the spirit, get some
production.
Bigger smoke, because peat was everything for a while there in the peat wars. So you're pulling more of the fusols, more of the phenols, all that kind of stuff. I don't think it's benefited a lot of peated whiskeys. I think the back end tends to be kind of black licoricey and burnt rubbery and kind of sharp. I think when we go back and drink peated whiskeys from an earlier age, they're a lot fruitier on the back end. Usually it's finishes of apple skins, not black licorice to me. Still a good whiskey, but I think it's just something that is a hallmark of this age. I think it's going to be something we reflect back on later.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting, right? Where you've kind of got like this Jim Swan distilleries that are taking really, really narrow cuts early on in there. You've got sort of all these peated folks who are taking really, really deep cuts into those fuse oils, as you mentioned. And it feels like the pendulum needs to swing back somewhere into that middle again.
Yes.
But yeah, it'll be interesting. I don't know. It'll be a fascinating thing to look back at a couple decades from now if we're in a golden era, or whether we're in an era that's going to be looked back.
We're gonna be like those old guys who are like, I remember when.
If anything, the three of us are just going to be, what are those two
like Laphroaig
in the Muppets that just stand up on the bow, sit up on the balcony and laugh at everybody. So I feel like that's where
I kind of feel like too, our group, our generation, and a lot of the people in this room, because we've all been drinking together for a long time here, I think. We've been lucky enough to kind of have that age of innocence and age of experience. We've talked about this lots, Andrew, Doug, all these old whiskeys that we used to drink on the daily that were just absolutely stupendous compared to what's available now. So we had all of that beautiful stuff at our disposal. But the age now is one of the most exciting ages in whiskey ever. There's been so many cool new innovations. There's been so many new distilleries that are exciting. I think the younger whiskeys that are coming out now are better than they've ever been. Like there's a lot of really cool stuff nowadays too. So I think it's just a different kind of golden age right now.
So I had to look up Suzanne's reference to a pepperette, which is essentially best I can tell, it is a dried up hot dog, which is fascinating. I'm guessing that is more of a Quebec, Ontario thing than an Alberta thing, because I've not heard that before. Doug, you've straddled both worlds. Have you come across a pepperette before?
I feel like I've probably had one at some point in the backcountry of canoeing through Algonquin Park at some point.
Like how far is that from a Slim Jim? That's what I want to know. Like how closely related are they? Suzanne's saying she doesn't even know.
I mean, a Slim Jim is more like a mass-produced sort of American sausage, right? Whereas this is more of like a sort of, I feel like, backwoods Ontario, Quebec, Upper Canada, Lower Canada style of smoked cured meat in the tiny casing.
Phil's saying hot rod.
Yeah.
Man, I've been spoiled. You know, my mom used to take me to like the good old style. Like we used to have a great German deli, like 5 blocks from our house. And then like I've got peasant cheese now. I'm on the Landjager and the chimney sticks. I'm not even touching the hot rods or the Slim Jims. So
Landjager, yes.
spoiled.
Although Jeff is looking for, is looking for like a Fat Joe than a Slim Jim. So as usual, by this point of the tasting, I find Jeff far too humorous with his comments. So
You have to be careful. You have to be careful. All right, it's time for the speed round. We're going to go back through, see how things have held up, see if they've changed. So back to that Mannochmore. To me, it's fruit and floral. Very little has changed on the nose.
More floral this time around for me. More orange notes too.
Oh, and the palate on that, with a little time and patience, that's a whiskey that punches well above its weight. I know it's a style that not everyone's into. I mean, that's somewhat like that's kind of medium spirit driven at a younger age, and it shows really well. That's the sort of whiskey that I would like to be served flying to Europe, as opposed to Highland Park, whatever, or Johnny Walker Black Label. That's what I want to be poured just before I nod off for 3 hours and pretend I'm going to wake up refreshed.
yeah, no, I think I would certainly echo Kurt's point as well. The floral sort of like orangey sort of notes have really come out for me a lot more. Given a little bit of time. Oh.
Pepperettes are coming out.
Yeah.
I mean, without zooming in, I'd have a hard time telling that wasn't like a Twizzler, but with the bag makes it clear. So
it is officially a sausage party of many different kinds. It feels like
on multiple levels.
Yes.
Kurt.
I can't believe how well it held up. I think it's softened. I think it's better than it was the first time around for me. Really like the nose. Palate's okay to me. I would happily drink this though, for sure. It's over what you just suggested for a plane ride, no brainer. It's quite a banger for the price point too.
I think that's one of those ones where I might, maybe on my next trip, I might just tuck a wee sample of that in the bag and hope no one notices. I just need a glass. That's it, just a glass. You're not allowed to do that incidentally. Don't do it. I did have a famous incident on WestJet where the woman took away my dram and glass. And it was like a 1960 something Tullibardine at that time. But anyway, I did get someone from WestJet who apologized to me, even though I was technically breaking the law. But that's a whole different story. Bunnahabhain, how's it showing?
I think it's a little too long in the glass, but it's still beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's fading on the nose for sure.
Yeah,
fading on the nose, but that medium finish on it is just beauty. Such a sweet spot for me now. It's the Caol Ila is finally coming off my palate. I feel like where I'm really appreciating these a lot more. But
it's milk chocolate. It's tropical, and it's got like faint hints of like those old school sherry drams, like the General and that Port Ascot 45. It's not there, but it's got like traces of that, and yeah, I really like that whiskey.
You're forgetting about the famous Berry Brothers 40-year-old Edrington blend that came out for.
Very good call.
That's another one that it reminds me of.
Mm-hmm.
This the palate, the nose seemed a little restrained. It seemed almost like it had slightly oxidized a little bit. The palate is still absolutely firing on all cylinders. Great whiskey.
Yeah. Okay. Rosebank.
It's almost empty.
How often do you have two, like, I don't know, what's the right word here, marquee whiskeys in a tasting in the 2 and 3 spots?
2, 3, and 4, I would argue.
Yeah. 2, 3, 4, yeah.
It's creamy. It's like a lemon cream or a lemon mousse almost to me. Light floral tones. So creamy compared to the first time around.
It's almost going to creamsicle. Not quite that orangey, but it's getting close.
Okay, I know I'm going to start a shitstorm in the comments for saying this, but going back, I was torn the first time around on the Bunna versus the Rosebank. I feel like I'm now fully in the Bunna camp in terms of my favorite between the two. I'm sorry to all of you that I'm insulting by saying that. I'm going to take the fire and accept it, but that Bunna finish is just so creamy and delicious and amazing.
Yeah, but it's like listening to Iggy Pop versus listening to Kind of Blue. You know what I mean? Like one of them's loud and rambunctious, one of them's really beautiful and mellow, and you want to sit quietly. I still don't know which one I prefer, to be honest.
I'm kind of with you, Doug, but I'm also kind of not. Like the Rosebank to me actually has risen in esteem the second time round. I think it's showing better than before, but I do like that style.
Yeah.
Um,
That's okay. I appreciate that you're both wrong, and that probably the sausage has thrown Suzanne's palate off a little bit. So I'll just accept all of your apologies tomorrow.
that's Suzanne's version of bread and water. It just has a little pepperette just to refresh the palate between drams. All right. Carsebridge. Oh man.
I mean, for this price point, if this not is not sold out by like tomorrow morning, I'm personally gonna sign on tomorrow morning and probably buy a bottle of this because it's for what it is and the value in that. I think it's pretty special for a single grain, not being traditionally a single grain type of guy.
What I would even go one step further and just say for an older whiskey period, this is it's elegant, it's complex, it's fruity. The oak, like sherry cask and grain, the fact that it hasn't overwhelmed the spirit is remarkable to me. And no rough edges. It's not raw. Uh, yeah, I've not come across a lot of grains that have done well in active sherry, and this is a real curiosity to me.
I mean, I feel like there was probably some guy, 48, 50 years ago that decided to put a single grain in some amazing sherry barrel and got yelled at by his manager or something else. And he was just like, no, wait, this is going to be amazing one day. And he's probably long since retired, hopefully still with us.
Probably
But
not with this.
time has shown that he or she was correct.
They, if you will,
Yes.
they them. Uh, anyway, Kurt, thoughts?
I adore this one. I don't know what to say. It's not my style at all. Never would have leaned into a grain, never would have leaned into a sherried grain in particular, as you said. Killer whiskey.
Okay, cool. Uh, Ben Nevis, our sole Ben Nevi of the night.
You're not allowed to call it Ben Nevi if there's only one of them. Like for your Ben's tasting, it's a Ben Nevi tasting. But if there's only one Ben Nevis, you can't. It's
But
just.
I mean, I'm not going to say our sole Ben Nevis is.
Thank goodness there isn't any linguists. I'm assuming on this tasting because we would have
Or,
just shreds by this point. I feel
or
like.
presumably English majors, uh, English teachers,
or phoneticists.
phoneticists. That's right. I really hope there are phoneticists in the world because that is such an incredible word. I feel like that would be a position in Star Trek. Like before you learn how the universal translator works, you got to be a phoneticist.
Yeah, exactly. You've got to go spend a decade with the Ferengi, a decade with the Klingons, and then you come back and
yeah,
hopefully aren't too disturbed after those couple of decades out in the wild.
Exactly. All right. What do we think of the Ben Nevis?
It's a good one, not a great one. Underripe, I still stick with. I think the nose is even better than first time around. Palate, not as good as first time around.
It's kind of like a really, I don't know why this came to me all of a sudden, like a really spicy Sprite, like where it's like it's an over like it's got too much CO2 in it, where you've made your own Sprite at home with the like your machine, and you've just like sat on the CO2 for 2 or 3 minutes, and it's just like spicy, it's sweet, there's a little creaminess, but it also burns a little bit as well.
So it's as if the people who brought you Iron Brew decided to make their version of Sprite.
I feel like
they hadn't done enough damage.
in that. I feel like, another couple of drams and we would be able to churn out a couple of amazing advertisements for that.
Funny.
All right, let's go to the weird and the wacky, the Croftengea.
Only for science. I'm only doing this.
I mean, the nose to me on this has improved. Now it's like it's chocolate, it's peat, it's like burning electric circuits. So you got a little bit of plastic and maybe a bit of what's that metal they burn or they use the soldering metal. You got a little bit of that going on there too.
We evolved to shy away from bitter and things that smell like they're dangerous to us. This one says, "Don't drink me."
But I mean, that's what almost every mezcal smells like, and mezcal is delicious.
Oh,
I'm going to go out there. I still like it. It's not quite as vibrant and off the wall as it was when we first tasted it, but I still like it.
I'm really questioning a lot of people's palates here tonight.
but I feel like this and the Bunnahabhain, I would actually want to spend the most time with. Like if I had big like sniffers of this where I could just sit next to a fireplace and stare at a wall for 3 or 4 hours and just go back to two glasses, those are the two that I would just want to go back and contemplate time and space.
Here's a question for you. What movie would you want to watch with this whiskey?
I mean, like something weird and crazy like A Clockwork Orange, just so that the madness surrounds me in everything that I do, from glass to TV. I don't know how else to describe it. Or like 2001: A Space Odyssey, where I just want to scream the entire night, even though it's just silence throughout it. I don't know.
Blade Runner.
Blade Runner might be a good one, but if you haven't seen it, I just looked it up because I didn't remember the name. There's a 2021 Finnish World War II movie called Sisu. This whiskey would go really well with Sisu. It's basically Nazi revenge porn, where this like gold miner in Finland is just trying to mind his own business, but the Nazis get in his way, and he goes like apocalyptic on them. It's. I think a bottle of this and that movie would be a perfect pairing. So, Caol Ila.
Oh. It pains me that this is my least favorite of the night, given how much I usually love Caol Ila, but I feel like after going through all these again, the nose has not improved for me.
And actually, Doug, I agree with you on that. I think the palate's kind of fallen apart on it too. Like it's got this weird, I don't know, it's like unbalanced, unstructured. The bacon's burnt. Like you never burn the bacon. You want it a little bit chewy. You want to render those fats nicely, but not burn them. They burned the fats on that one.
Yeah, no, it's I'm in the backwoods. I've burned my pea meal bacon for that in the backwoods canoeing, and now I'm stuck with only pepperettes for the rest of the canoe trip. I feel like, which
that's a rough trip. Like a rough trip. All right, I'm going to trigger the poll here. Everybody gets a chance to vote. You get 2 votes. Phil and Suzanne get their own votes tonight because they're in different provinces. That doesn't happen very often. While people are voting, Kurt.
Yep.
We've got some interesting stuff landing. Not only do we have an Inchgour, Bladnoch, and Benromic launching tomorrow, but in 2 weeks' time, we will have a Cavalan, Amroot, and Aaron KWM exclusive cask. It is the fall of plenty, which is not good for the old bank account, but it's pretty exciting for stuff that's coming that we get to talk about and pour samples for people.
Yeah, that Bladnoch's crazy cool. Super exciting to get the opportunity at something like that. Those opportunities don't come along very often.
No.
Big outlay, but I think Andrew knew right away that it had to happen no matter what. So that one, very, very small amounts of that one. The Benromic, Andrew nailed it earlier. And if you go back and read my notes on like the cask that's in the shop right now. I literally said, "This is the new Brora." There, I said it in the tasting notes. I remember that. Ben Romick is the way to go. That one I picked, and this one that we picked for the store, I could have flipped a coin and been happy with either one of them. Andrew would probably say the same. Killer cask. This 2002 that's coming after 20 years is so unbelievably pretty with all of those like complex farmy notes behind it. You have to try that Ben Romick. It's so exciting.
So all I can say is having been fortunate enough to being able to try the both. The Ben Romick is absolutely stunning. It should absolutely be put up against not only a Brora, but in my humble opinion, a Springbank. But that Bladnoch is so amazing. I think it should be put up next to a Bullmore because there's a floral note in that Bladnoch for me.
Lavender, yeah.
That just pairs so nicely with some of those most lovely floral Bullmores that I feel like that in and of itself could be a pretty amazing tasting.
Yeah,
you know,
Doug's been lucky to try both those casks. I know not a lot of people have, but we've got events coming up with them. Our Ben Romick tasting, I think I should add, if you haven't got tickets to it yet, I'm pretty sure there might still be a handful of spots left for that Ben Romick tasting. We did add to it over time. I'm just double checking right now. Yeah, there's still about 20 of the 80 spots that we put in there available for it. Kurt's cask, his club's cask is going to be in that. The store cask is going to be in it too. And a prior KWM cask, our 2003 from a couple years back. It is an absolutely lovely cask. But Kurt, the reason I brought that up, I wanted to highlight is we got samples of Cavalan Solus Cherry, partly because we never see it. And we just wanted to try it. And one of them was so good that it was like, oh yeah, we have to do this. We'll regret it if we don't. And then the Amroot, like, when did we bottled a port cask Amroot, which is, I never thought I would do a port cask anything, let alone an Amroot. And it was it's a gorgeous, gorgeous whiskey coming as well too.
Yeah, the Cavalan, I'm sure you remember, none of the other people here would really have an idea, but I think you'd agreed to a Cavalan in the past, right, for the store, and the price just came back at such an astronomical number. We pulled out of it. So it was cool that the price is fair, that the quality was just that high. So it's kind of cool to have a bespoke Cavalan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, fun stuff coming, and then there's a cheap as chips sherry cask Aaron 9-year-old coming that I'm excited about too. So fun stuff coming in the weeks ahead. Back to the poll. Let's see. The voting is mostly done. 2 of you have not managed to vote yet. If you are still intending to vote, you've got like 30 seconds. But
I'm one of them, Andrew. I'm not a host anymore here.
Oh, you're not? Oh, Kurt gets to vote. Well, Kurt, you've got like 10 seconds. I'm going to close this off. Okay. I'm actually a little surprised by the vote for the first 2 favorites, but we'll get to that in a second. But overall, I'm actually, I think these the votes are interesting. So there we go. I'm killing it. I'm going to share them. The winner tonight by a decent margin is the Bunnahabhain 44. Not surprised. It's a gorgeous whiskey. Rosebank a close second. Obviously, those 2 are the big heavy hitters here. But this is where things get really interesting. The Carsebridge, Doug called that one like streaming ahead for second favorite, and by a landslide. It's not even close. But I love the tied for third is the Croftengea, because I think that is such an underrated whiskey. I know it's a weird style, and that's what drew me to it. It's a weird style without being off-putting, at least to anyone whose name isn't Kurt. It's not off-putting. So
no, Phil and whoever else voted for that as their second favorite. I completely agree with you.
There you go. Cool. All right, I normally do this. I'm going to start with Doug as our guest tonight. Doug, your 2 favorite whiskeys, starting with number 2.
So the peated Loch Lomond, I think, was my second, only because it was so weird. That the Rosebank is lovely. It's very difficult. The Carsebridge is lovely. I mean, honestly, the Mannochmore was a surprise for me. I think I bought a bottle of this when it first came in, but I've kind of forgotten about it a little bit. But yeah, the Bunnahabhain for me, I think really ended the night as my favorite as well. Cool. And thank you for having me and putting up with me tonight. So.
Oh, of course. Thanks for filling in on short notice. Our harmony for the night, if you will. Kurt, Kurt, you're too.
I love when Doug's here. It's always fun. Yeah, I hate to say it, but I was literally with the 1 and 2 there. The Bunnahabhain, I wasn't going to pick as my number 1, but when we went back to the speed round, the way the palate held up was gorgeous. And my number 2 was the Carsebridge. I loved those tropical notes on it that were coming through at the back. I loved how juicy it was on the palate. It wore its years well. And the integration of sherry and grain, I couldn't believe it. It doesn't normally work that well. So as much as I wanted the Rosebank to be my number 1 or number 2, it just couldn't be with those 2 in the lineup. What about you?
My number 2 is the Mannochmore.
Cool.
I really like the Croftengea. It's fun. I'd like to spend some time with it, but like that Mannochmore is a sessionable whiskey. I could just sit and chat with people and drink that for an entire night and not complain. I like the Carsebridge, but again, it's that grain style, so it's kind of narrow. You know, you're going to get just more and more and more of the same thing. The Rosebank to me is good, but not great. The Bunna is the runaway favorite for me, but Mannochmore is number 2. And if I had to do a third, it would be the Croftengea. So.
I love these nights where there's such spirited debate about these and there's such great whiskeys in front of us. So.
Yeah, no, good lineup. I want to thank Doug, Kurt for joining me tonight. This was a great tasting. There will be a newsletter out tomorrow, hopefully early, but it depends on whether I get it finished tonight or first thing in the morning. 3 casks launching tomorrow. In addition to that, and don't go looking on the website because you won't find them yet, we have a Lafroig and a Lacheg and a gorgeous 25-year-old Speyside from Single Malts of Scotland, and some other stuff that's coming in the weeks ahead. So there's some cool stuff dropping in tomorrow's newsletter. Keep an eye out for it. If you were considering an Uber whiskey calendar and don't have one yet, there are, as I said, 4 left. Then it's done. There's some cool stuff in there. You don't want to miss it. Thanks for tuning in tonight. Hope you enjoyed the tasting. Phil, safe travels getting back home. Hope you and Jeff are able to connect on the West Coast and settle your differences somehow in an amicable manner. Maybe go to a brewery and smoke a fatty, have a couple pints of beer. That ought to sort that out. Be well. We'll see you at the next tasting. We've got tastings next week and the week after, and all the way up till Christmas with the whiskey calendar. So hope you have a great night, and we'll talk again soon.